the table is one of the most exciting things that's come out of this community. So we'll be, as Jungo said, the two guests will present for a while, and then you can be typing questions and answers into the question and answer box, and I'll try to make sure we get all through them. I may combine some or something to help us get through it all. Kajunga, can you put the slides up now for the well, let's mention here that we do have some upcoming events. Kajunga, are you going to talk about that now, or do you want me to talk about that?
Yes, please. We have the workshop coming. It's called Transformative Community Conference Training. The instructor will be W. Anthony Hook, and it will be February 16 to Saturday, February 17, 2018 at Eastern Mennonite University. For more information, very soon we'll report this information on our website. And I will let Howard to talk about the coming webinar for the spring semester. You can unmute Howard Zehr. We don't hear you.
Oh. Do you not hear me now? Do you hear me? You did hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what happened because it says it's unmuted. We have one more webinar coming up this fall, or this in December, and then we have a new series starting in the fall, or in the spring, winter, spring. So January 17, we will be talking about restorative justice in prison. We have two guests. Both of them have served life sentences and been released, Tyrone Wirtz and Greg Winship. On the February 21, we will be talking about this whole question of restorative justice standards. How does one work at that issue? That's been a very, very contested issue, as many of you know, in the field. In March 14, we'll be talking about young people and sexual harm. And then on the 18th of April, the state of restorative justice and victims. The whole issue of what does victimization mean, who are victims, how do they be incorporated, and so forth. So we will have more details shortly on the website, but we wanted you to know it was coming. So to our topic, coming to the table, we have two guests today. First one I'll introduce is Jodie Geddes. Jodie is a graduate of our program, I'm very happy to say. She works with RJOY, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth in Oakland, California. She's especially working on the possibility of a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She sees herself as a community organizer, a writer, a restorative justice healer, and that comes partly out of her own experience. She was born in Jamaica. She immigrated to the United States when she was 6, and that has given her this passion for justice and healing. So we're happy to have you here, Jodie. It's good to see you again. And the other guest is Tom DeWolf. Tom comes from one of the most, I think, the most prominent slave trading families in America. He has been addressing that issue in a variety of ways. He was part of a documentary film that retraced that trade. He has written 2 books on it. He's been very active in coming to the table. He is the executive director of Coming to the Table. And by the way, Jodie recently became the president of the board of managers of that Coming to the Table. So we've got some key people here. Tom travels a lot as a speaker and doing book signings and so forth. I've known Tom for a long time, and if those of you who go back a long way in restorative justice will remember Dennis Malone. Well, Dennis was he was a very active until he died of a heart attack, and Tom was a friend of his. They both lived in Bend, Oregon. So a little bit of extra information there for you. So we're very glad to have both of you, and I'll turn it over to you, and your PowerPoints will take over from here. So good to have you.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. We appreciate everybody taking the time out of your day to join us here. Coming to the Table was founded in January 2006. The first gathering took place on the campus of EMU, and there were about 24 of us that were there that weekend. And it was cold outside, but warm inside. And as you can see, Howard took a lot of photos for us that weekend. And we did a lot of study together, a lot of working together in developing what would later become the Coming to the Table approach. Coming to the Table was founded by the Black and white descendants of Thomas Jefferson and the Hairston family, the largest plantation owning family, or one of the largest in the United States. There was, in 2008 was the next big gathering, and that was the Summer Peacebuilding Institute class that took place that spring, 2.5 years after that first initial gathering. And this was a week-long course focused on what was becoming the Coming to the Table approach. Coming to the Table has continued to grow since that time, and in 2015 incorporated as a separate entity, an LLC, in the state of Virginia, and continues a very strong and close relationship with the Center for Justice and Peacebuilding and Eastern Mennonite University. Coming to the Table receives its 501c3 nonprofit status through our relationship with EMU. Coming to the Table has developed a specific vision for the United States of a just and truthful society that acknowledges and seeks to heal from the racial wounds of the past, from slavery and the many forms of racism that it spawned. We have a particular mission of providing leadership and resources and a supportive environment. And this all started in the state of Virginia. Home base for Coming to the Table is right in Harrisonburg at EMU. It was founded there by the descendants of Thomas Jefferson and his wife Martha, as well as his Thomas Jefferson and the woman that he owned, Sally Hemings, and their descendants worked together in creating Coming to the Table, as well as I mentioned the descendants of the Hairstons. And if you want more information on that, there's a book called The Hairstons, An American Family in Black and White, that you can check out. But the point was that is coming together with this new idea of what the legacy of slavery, healing from those wounds could be. And the whole Coming to the Table approach is based on theories and practices taught at EMU, which we'll go into more shortly. I have one quick story, another Virginia story, and that's about Phoebe Kilby and Betty Kilby Baldwin. They both have roots in Front Royal, Virginia. They first met in 2007, about 10 years ago. Phoebe, who is white, reached out to Betty, who is black. Phoebe's ancestors had owned Betty's ancestors in Virginia, and the two women communicated by email for a while, and eventually Betty invited Phoebe to join her family for dinner. And there were some members of Betty's family who were understandably skeptical, a little concerned, and Betty thought this may have been one of the craziest things she had ever done. Now, 10 years later, Betty and Phoebe continue to travel the country, sharing their Coming to the Table story with people throughout the United States. You can read all about it from an article that was in CNN that we have posted on the Coming to the Table website. If you go onto the news page and scroll all the way to the bottom, it's the very first article that we have posted on our news page. There are currently 23 local affiliate groups throughout the United States. The most in a single state is Virginia. We have 5 local groups there in the Shenandoah Valley, one in Richmond, another in Lexington, the Eastern Shore of Virginia, and one in Northern Virginia in Vienna. And with that background, I'll turn it over to Jodie to take it from here.
Hi, everyone. Definitely really great to be here and sharing this space with you all, and thank you for that introduction, Tom. So I'm just going to really talk a little bit about what it means to transform historical harms and really looking through the lens of trauma as a way to inform how we engage in our legacy and history around slavery. And I think often we don't acknowledge the violence and the sin of slavery as a particular kind of trauma. So what you're seeing right now is a model that's within our Transforming Historical Harms Manual that you can find on our resources page on the Coming to the Table website. So when there is a traumatic kind of event or experience, people engage with that on multiple levels. The first level is oftentimes the individual level, and then the next level is oftentimes the group level, right? But one of the things that we find happening is that we don't talk about the way in which people are engaging and interacting with trauma on a group level. We only talk about how that happens on an individual level. And I think one of the main reasons for that is if we begin to talk about trauma on the group level, we also have to talk about the institutions and policies that support the kind of prolonging of that trauma, the perpetuation of that particular trauma and harm, which means we then have to talk about who are the people and the stories are on the margins. And throughout history in different moments, there are different identities that kind of embody who are on the margins. So depending on the issue, might be queer folks or people from a particular kind of religion. But in this case, thinking about Black folks in the United States, right? That we often talk about, we don't even often talk about the trauma that Black folks in the United States have faced on the individual or on the group level. And so what we're looking at right now when we talk about legacy and aftermath is a legacy of these kind of stories, beliefs, the mythology of who people are that is then supported by particular kind of institutions and structures. And so an example of that is that, Europeans are civilized and they're good, right? So it therefore makes the value judgment that anyone who is not European is then uncivilized and somehow evil, right? And so that's the legacy particular part, the value judgment on who people are. And then it takes us into this place of the aftermath. And so the aftermath are the way that these institutions are developed and created. And so in that particular example, the aftermath is the supporting of slavery and policies of bondage, right? So this is a huge part of our work as Coming to the Table, because it allows us to not just engage in transforming historical harms, our wounds and legacy of slavery, but also for us to begin looking at how do we transform ourselves as individuals, but also talk about the collective traumas that people face, right? So it's not enough for us to believe that we are each good people and we're equal to each other. But what we need to begin doing is pushing ourselves to the space where we're saying, how do we also shift the institutions, policies, and practices that kind of support this perpetuating of trauma and harm? And so Tom mentioned the different local groups that we have. I first started coming to the local group in the Shenandoah Valley in Harrisonburg, Virginia. We met on EMU's campus. And one of the things when we're talking about structures, right, that EMU is on one side of town, and then there's a whole nother group of people on another side of town. So a high population of Latino folks, Black folks, refugee, and immigrants, right? And we're talking about an area where the transportation might not be as sophisticated as places like DC and New York, right? And so that's another kind of particular kind of structure when we talk about geography and transportation that is very much a part of our history and legacy of slavery and of access and of civil rights, right? And so one of the proposals that we made to think about what would it mean to get young people at the table and also Black folks at the table who have been a large part of the history of Harrisonburg, Virginia, was to move some of our meetings to the local Boys and Girls Club, right? So we have low-income families that are going there, many people who are on the margins, but also want to engage in these conversations, but might not have access to transportation on a Saturday morning, right? And so once again, we have to begin to examine what our stories are, right, of why people are not showing up to our meetings, who doesn't want to show up to our meetings, and then at the same time, begin to say, how do we shift the way that we are building structures to allow for people to function in relationship with each other? And so it's not just about us sitting in a restorative justice circle process is a coming to the table group and building relationships, but also investigating how do we shift those structures that inform the ways that we are in relationship with each other. Tom, are you still here? Because I can't go on to the next slide. So meanwhile, we're waiting for the next slide to come up. I can kind of move into, thank you, the cycles of violence and trauma. I think this is particularly important, and I've definitely seen this model really change over time. I think it has really grown to begin to acknowledge the structural trauma. So what happens, right? You know, a kind of harm happens to you or a violation happens to you, right? And that is a traumatic event. There are these moments of psychological change, shock, denial. How could it be? How did this happen? Why me? There's a lot of questioning that happens, and there are multiple cycles. So there is this kind of acting in cycle of questioning maybe sometimes one's spiritual beliefs, one's own self-worth, right? So the harm that was committed, people begin to blame themselves as the reason why the harm was committed against them. There begins to grow this kind of need for justice, and oftentimes justice is seen as revenge. So often perpetuating the particular kind of harm and not thinking about restorative ways that we can engage with the harm. And then we move into this place of acting out. So we begin to dehumanize the other, right? So we begin to make generalizations about particular groups of people if we felt like we have been harmed, whether it was by that group or not, right? We begin to act out into the community, viewing violence as redemptive. That is the only way. We often see that happening within our criminal justice system. There begins to be a blaming of others. Sometimes you might see bullying, attacking in the name of self-defense and justice and honor, right? So what we need to begin to do is think about another way that we are engaging in conversations around trauma so that we begin to understand that conflict is normal, not necessarily harm, but when conflict happens or disruption happens in our life, that there are these normative responses, which is often the acting in and the acting out response. But it's more so about how do we engage in that? How do we create a space for us to engage more deeply in naming the trauma as a way for us to move forward, right? So when we talk about, particularly around our history and legacy of slavery, we say, let's kind of give reparations, right? And often people see reparations in the form of just money, right? So let's say we gave money to Black folks in America that have been harmed through the legacy and history of slavery, right? That is not enough because we're talking about a particular wound of trauma. So there is a residue that's left behind. And what we really know is that the more traumatic the circumstances, the more likely it is to be passed down through generations. And so that's when we begin to talk about how do we break away from the cycle of violence and begin to really build resilience, right? And a lot of that is through having those conversations. One, acknowledging the particular traumatic experience or event. And that is where, when we talk about a history and legacy of slavery, we often get it wrong because I think people are afraid to be wrong. So people are like, I'm not racist. You know, it wasn't my family that owned slaves. I didn't own slaves. Yes, and yet there are particular policies and institutions in which you benefit from, right? And those are the things we want to begin acknowledging, right? So we go to this acknowledgement, and then we begin to do this reconnecting, right? Sometimes people choose to forgive, and forgiveness doesn't mean forget. Forgiveness doesn't mean that we don't hold folks accountable, but within the acknowledge, we begin to find ways to really reconcile with the harm, engaging with the other, right? So someone who has committed harm against you. So maybe one particular person, if it's in a small community, not really diverse, and you have a particular racially driven harm that happens, or it's really engaging with society, right? And that's what we also do as a part of coming to the table, really thinking about how do we hold our systems and structures accountable to what they have named, right? So if the policies are meant to support and uplift and build communities, why do we have communities that are facing mass forms of gentrification and police terrorism, right? We have to begin asking those questions. And that leads into even thinking about a national truth and reconciliation process. The project I'm working on right now through RJoy and Coming to the Table is one of our partners within that work, because it's not just enough, once again, to talk about these things on the individual level, we also need to change the structures that continue to perpetuate that harm so that we can lead to this reintegration of folks back into community, right? So after we began to reconcile with this on the personal level, what does it mean for how people engage on a community level, on a structural level, on a societal level? And those are the things I think that is really important for us to really talk about, because individuals and societies heal together. It's not just one or the other. And so really about, once again, moving from just our beliefs to examining the institutions that support our beliefs so that we can really break free from this trauma cycle. That leads us to the framework that really grounds who we are as an organization. And so restorative justice, I think, is very fit to really hold these conversations, right? It is very conflictual when we have conversations about race. Nonetheless, it is painful, and it is a breaking free cycle, and that doesn't come without some resistance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about restorative justice. So it is really a framework and theory of justice that emphasizes, bringing together everyone affected by wrongdoing, right? To address needs and accountability in order to move towards healing, which is very different from our other systems that often talk about punishment. Punishment is seen as the obligation and the way to meet the needs. And it's also usually predetermined. And one of the things that happens with punishment is that we see punishment as that kind of high accountability, but we don't provide high support, right? So if I'm in space, in a circle process, for example, with, a majority of white folks, I'm one of, let's say 2 to 3 Black folks in the circle, right? I can let someone know what their microaggression, what their microaggression is, the way that they may have committed harm in that circle and perpetuated harm in other spaces. But what are the ways that that space is providing the necessary tools for support for that person to come to their own awakening? So it doesn't mean for Black folks to teach white folks how to somehow not be racist or hold prejudice or be discriminatory, but to provide a space where people can be held accountable, but also be provided with tools for support. And that's why we have such a wealth of resources, like folks coming to Center for Justice and Peace Building at the Summer Peace Building Institute to engage in STAR training, to engage in restorative justice training. And we see that as a way to build people's leadership and capacity skills to do the work of accountability and the work of support. And I think one of the most important things is the circle process really offers a space to challenge dominant narratives and structures and stories that we tell about each other, right? So the way that we view each other is often because of the system's lens of who we are. So the way that I view Tom as a white man is often embedded as a part of what the system tells me that whiteness is, and sometimes vice versa, right? So engaging in the circle process allows space for everyone, right? So there's a nuance in what Blackness looks like. There's a nuance in what whiteness looks like, and all the range of the way that we even see what it means to be Black. What is Black, right? The way that we see what it means to be white, and really allows us to engage in this intersectional shared narrative about our history and legacy of slavery in the United States, about trauma and about harm. And I think that's one of the more important things for us to begin to acknowledge. So that leads us into the next part of the restorative justice circle process, really thinking about this expression of ancient and indigenous practices of reconciliation and community building, right? And this kind of gave rise when there was a large group of young folks, Maori-identified young folks, who were being criminalized, right? And the community had their own practices of healing that was in direct opposition to the criminal justice system. And so they began to say, there is another way for us to do this, and began to use restorative justice. And it's their traditional practice, but what we name as restorative justice, I think that's important to acknowledge, to begin to address harm within their communities, right? To think about reintegration and reconciliation. And some of the places where this is also replicated is in Rwanda, when we think about their gacaca process, which kind of translates to grassroots. The same thing in Sierra Leone with Femble Talk, being able to recognize that we are talking about a community process, an ancient community practice. And I think that's why, no matter how uncomfortable it is still something that can feel natural when people begin to sit in circle and they are able to see each other. And some people are being seen for the first time, right? And I think many of us on a societal level that we want to be seen, but yet we are afraid of being seen because we don't want to be shamed and judged. Because there's so many other places when we begin to show who we are, there's a shaming and there's a judging. And I think restorative justice calls into question, what do we want our communities to be and look like? And ultimately, what do we want our communities to feel like? Do we want our communities to feel safe, right, and secure? And safety and security isn't about pushing certain folks and voices on the margins. It's about the expansion of what community looks like and community feels like. And on many levels, that won't happen without acknowledging our historical harms that have taken place in the United States for all of us to break free, right? The liberation of those on the margins is also the liberation of those with privilege and power. And so restorative justice, first and foremost, is really about relationship building. So before we ever get to talking about a harm or an issue, and the harm could be a simple miscommunication in language that someone said and they felt hurt. And sometimes it happens in our local groups when we're sharing deep stories. It is bound to happen, and conflict is normal. And this is how we normalize conflict. We lean into it. But before we ever really get to talk about the harm and what has happened, or even talking about the history and legacy of slavery, which is a particular harm, there's always a getting acquainted that happens through ceremony, opening, and the use of the talking piece. Because that really says that first, we are human beings and not the worst thing that we've ever done, right? There are other pieces of who we are. And that moves us really into trust building and relationship building. And what I found as a restorative justice practitioner is if we don't take the time to do the trust and relationship building and talk about our values and ground ourselves in guidelines and consensus, we are only going to do more harm than good. Because then when conflict happens, we don't have any values to look back on or any guidelines to look back on to say that this is how we're moving forward through this space. And so at our Joy, we do this in the local groups. Folks are talking about the values. We also have a set of touchstones that Tom will talk a little bit more about as well, that help guide our meetings. And we can always take away, we can always add, but at least we know that there's something for us to really go back to. And one of the things I really want to talk about more is values. I think we often make an assumption that we have the same values because we show up in space with each other. And I think the reality is that we don't. And so any world that we want to create, we need to have the conversation about what our values are. So when we think about a system, at least when I think about a system such as a criminal justice system, I know that my values are not aligned with it. But as a very young child, when I saw what was identified as crime happen, my first instinct would often be to punish people, to incarcerate people. But my values were not directly aligned in that. I wanted healing, I wanted conversation, but did not know another way to do so, right? And when later on in life definitely was offered another way to do so through restorative justice that allowed me to name my values and say, there are systems that I support, whether it's through tax dollars, or through my ideas that I hold and I announce that are not aligned with my values. And so restorative justice gives us an opportunity to name that and to acknowledge that, particularly through the circle process and honoring every single person that's in that space. And so if there are particular groups of people that have committed harm and perpetuated it that are in that space, to still honor them as human beings and to first and foremost think about our relationships.
So coming to the table, as Jodie has explained, it's really deeply grounded in trauma awareness and resilience, in restorative justice principles, in the use of the circle process. And she mentioned the touchstones, the agreements, which are as part of the relationship building processes. How are we going to treat each other when we're working together on these issues? Are we going to maintain confidentiality, ideas about respect and equality within a circle? We've got two different sets of touchstone examples on the Coming to the Table website under resources, but it's really setting these agreements on how we're going to treat each other. And with all of that background, Coming to the Table rests on four main pillars. And The first one is coming right up, uncovering history, which is really looking at all of history with openness, with honesty, with curiosity, with wonder, and not being afraid of things that we have been raised to see as horrible and unsavory, but being really honest about all of the history of this nation, the annihilation and subjugation of Native peoples, the enslavement of African peoples, the way that European people have treated many others, Mexican people, the land that was stolen from Mexico, Chinese people, Japanese people. So it's uncovering all of history and trying to get beyond the feelings of guilt and shame that we're so good at spreading in this nation, but that often create then the walls that keep us separated. So an openness and curiosity as we're looking at history. And then the building of connections, which we've talked a bit about throughout our time together so far. It's really building authentic and accountable relationships with people both within our groups that we have grown up with, feeling comfortable with, and outside of those groups, within and across racial lines and gender lines, making these deep connections and building the trust, building the caring for each other, and to allow then for dealing more openly and honestly with what we learn about our personal, our community, and our national and worldwide history, and the kinds of traumas that we humans have inflicted upon each other throughout our history. Working towards healing by whatever means necessary, working individually in maybe a meditation practice, in community, in your faith communities. Working towards healing may involve yoga, music, art, you name it. We have groups within Coming to the Table that are doing this together, both our local groups and some working groups. And then the fourth pillar is taking action. All of the work leads towards taking action, and that is to undo systems of oppression that are based in race, systemic and structural systems of oppression. And so this is the work, and these are, even though these are numbered 1 through 4, none of the work that Coming to the Table does is in any particular order. It's all going to be random. It's all going to flow within and without. Coming to the Table today, a year ago we had 10 local affiliate groups. Today we have 23. The interest in this kind of work is just growing exponentially. In addition to the 23 local groups that are in 11 different states and Washington, D.C., we also have 6 working groups. We have a Linked Descendants working group. They manage the Bittersweet blog, and its main focus is on linked descendants that are linked through the history and legacy of slavery, perhaps by blood, perhaps by affinity to a particular owner or plantation, or system of enslavement in our history. We've got the Millennials Working Group that's for developing and building strategies for youth engagement in this work, building intergenerational healing. We have a Reparations Working Group, and there's a draft reparations document on the Coming to the Table website that they continue to work on. We have a Writers Working Group, and there will be an anthology that we just got the announcement here recently that a contract has been signed, and the Coming to the Table anthology book will be released later this year, probably, later next year in the fall. We have a Meditation as a Healing Resource Working Group, and they hold monthly guided meditation calls, including one coming up this Saturday. Once or twice a month, we have a call like this one where people spend time meditating together. Calls last 45 minutes to an hour, but working on using this particular resource towards healing. And our newest working group is the Pilgrimages Working Group that recently completed the first major pilgrimage visiting sites related to the legacy of slavery in Alabama, Mississippi, and Memphis, Tennessee, and completely filled up. very moving experience for the people who participated in that, including Jodie, who was there. We additionally have national gatherings every 2 years. The last couple of them and the next one held on the campus of Eastern Mennonite University. So next June in 2018, we'll be back at EMU for a national gathering, and you're all invited to join us. More information about that will be coming soon in the Coming to the Table newsletter, which you can sign up for on the main page of comingtothetable.org. We last June held the first training workshop, Leadership Training Institute at EMU, just prior to the national gathering. And then in July, Jodie and I co-facilitated a training in Los Angeles, California for about 25 participants as well. And the goal here is we're planning for more regular availability of such trainings for Coming to the Table local affiliate groups and local group facilitators and others as funding will support. We do have the next one that we have scheduled just prior to the national gathering next June. The growth in Coming to the Table has been just really wild. We now have 1,700 subscribers to the newsletter. A year ago, I think we had about 2,500 members of our Facebook group. There's now 4,200 members of the Facebook group. A year ago, there were 3,000 to 3,500 unique visitors to our website each month. Now we're experiencing anywhere from 11 to 14,000 people visiting the Coming to the Table website each month. It's a very lively group, and the growth just continues to both inspire and challenge us as we continue on. And finally, I do encourage people to visit our website at comingtothetable.org. Basically, everything that we've discussed today is there somewhere. There's a great deal of information and resources on the Coming to the Table website, and we encourage you to join in the conversation, to look at the possibility of a local group in your community, to get the newsletter, to participate in the conference calls, whatever place that you can plug in to help work towards healing the legacy of slavery in the United States. It's what Coming to the Table has been doing now for over 11 years, and we continue to go. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you, Howard, and see if you have questions or others may.
Well, thank you a lot, Jodie and Tom. Yeah, their questions are coming in here. I was going to ask you to say a little bit more about who can join and how, but then I have a question that just came in more specifically. What are the steps to become a Coming to the Table local group? Is there a particular type of organization or individual you expect to establish local groups? What are the subject expertise requirements of Coming to the Table local group leaders? And are trainings then Coming to the Table in person only, or do you have online training? We're trying to figure out how to rapidly deploy Coming to the Table. So there's a bunch of questions in there, but they have to do with how you join, how you become a local group, and so forth.
Okay. The simplest answer is on the website under the link of groups. There's working groups and there's local groups. And under the local groups, there's a document that explains the process for becoming a local affiliate of Coming to the Table. It's a pretty simple process to become a local affiliate. Really what we're looking for is people grounded in what we've been sharing today, and then agreeing to work in the spirit of Coming to the Table in a local community. And joining there's a join link to become an individual member of Coming to the Table that's at the top of the website, and then there's the local group page that explains all about local groups. In fact, there's a wonderful audio recording on that page that we held as a monthly conference call that explains a lot about what local groups are and what they do.
I think Tom also kind of really named where we're trying to go as an organization, about really trying to provide folks with the resources that they need to move towards taking that action. And so when we talk about expertise, some of that is grounded by the working groups, right? Being able to participate in some of those conversations, but also the leadership training that we're beginning to build, that we hope to have a mass group of leaders, kind of similar to train the trainers, where people would be able to go and be on the ground with folks to do further training around restorative justice, around STAR, and so on. And so we're really in the place of to grow and to be able to build that, even thinking about how we support folks in intergenerational work around racial healing. And so I think that question also points us to where we are trying to go as an organization, especially because a lot of people are coming at this from a heart space. And so some people don't, have the skills to kind of do some of the things we're talking about. And we want to be able to provide the resources for them to really be able to engage deeply, but also thinking about that these are hard conversations that they're having. So we want to provide as much skill as possible for them to move through it.
And to be honest, our training we're not doing as much as we plan to do in the not too distant future. That's been a growing thing. We just got an announcement today, Jodie, that we received a small grant that will help us with the next training that'll be coming up in June of next year. But our goal is to make this available as an online training as well. And then we do a lot interactively as members of the board, as staff, as other local group facilitators to help each other out in doing this work. So we've got a lot of folks to call on as resources. And I'll show you, this is the page I was referring to, the local affiliate groups page on the website. And it's up here under groups, where there's affiliate groups and working groups, and you can get all the information on both of those. Here is where people can join coming to the table as a member, the Stay Informed page over here to subscribe to the newsletter that comes out about once a month. So there's so much information on this website. The Transforming Historical Harms manual is on that page. That David Anderson Hooker was one of the co-authors of that manual here, the Transforming Historical Harms Guide. And I just put a plug in to watch David's Transformative Community Conferencing webinar that was 2 before this one, a wonderful webinar as well. Howard, you're muted.
I need someone to box me on the head here when it's time to talk. The person who asked that question had a couple follow-up statements, so I'll read those before I go on to the next question. Said that because I want to deploy national service model for coming to table type work, but those people who want to serve aren't necessarily deep restorative justice experts. And then suggests an online training with peer-to-peer support, and afterward through an online learning system is worthy of our exploration. So I don't know if you want to add anything on there.
The only thing I would add, Howard, is this is all part of our the board, the coming to the table as a whole. Kind of the core focus has been to provide more and more availability of training and resources, and just being real transparent and honest. We're a small nonprofit. We have one half-time staff position for this huge and growing organization. So you may have also noticed the donate button on the website, where we are looking for support to be able to expand this work. So appreciate anyone's involvement, volunteer time, financial donation, just helping to grow this work. But that's where really the only limitation right now is just the size of the organization and the capacity to respond.
Okay.
And also a part of our work is decolonizing, right? So looking at who we also see as experts and what does it mean to be an expert? And so for us, I would say, even though I'm probably the person that does the most RJ work out of folks that are a part of coming to the table, we don't have the intention for people to be experts, but just for people to continue, I think in many ways, to be supported in their efforts for a really transformed world and transformed community. And so any ways that we see people need support and they reach out to the board and they reach out to other local groups, we're kind of the catalyst for building that deeper relationship. And so we're not really asking people to be experts, because we want it to be something where people are not looking to us as coming to the table as an organization to do this work, but they are feeling comfortable and led to say that I want to transform my community and I want to transform this kind of society and world that we have, and they feel moved to do so.
Okay, let me go to a couple of very specific questions. One of them is, what are the examples of ceremonies for healing within the circle process? Are there any examples that you've been using that you could share?
So often there's a lot of stuff we do about calling ancestors into the space. And so there is a Ghanaian circle ritual that I often do sometimes, where you're calling an ancestor into the space and you're tying either string or ribbon. And sometimes there are specific colors that people are tying together to really think about what a circle means and what it means not to break that circle, but to really name more of the deeper purpose of us being in this space. Many of the rituals that come through and ceremonies that come through local groups are either based within Native American ceremonial tradition or Afrocentric tradition. And that's also guided mostly because we are engaging and working with restorative justice. And there's also a lot of libations that we do. And so even at the most recent pilgrimage, our kind of pilgrimage partnering with the Living Legacy Project, we did libations at many of the sites throughout the civil rights movement that we went to. And so libation is probably one of the most common ones. At our national gathering, there was an absolutely incredibly amazing libation ceremony that we did, planting of a tree. So, but a lot of it is really grounded within Native American traditions and practices, as well as Afrocentric traditions. And sometimes some people are just doing breathing, like let us do a meditation and really breathe and move through this together, doing movement. And then they're usually checking questions to follow to see how people are doing before we ever get to the deepness of what we'll be talking about. Anything you want to add, Tom?
I would just say that just to be clear, that there's nothing that coming to the table as an organization prescribes for groups to do. That, you know, the idea that each group is an autonomous group run by volunteers. I mean, you're agreeing to operate under the principles of coming to the table, and for that, coming to the table will publicize your group meetings in the newsletter and on the website, and support you with resources and other forms of support. But our different groups operate very differently, and it's what works in this community with this particular group of people, and it may change month to month, from meeting to meeting, what takes place within the circle. And, you know, some people meet for meals, some don't. Some go to films, some have book reading groups, some have meditation sessions. It's really up to the local community and the individuals in that community. And everything about coming to the table is to be open and equal and supportive in creating space for everyone.
Denise said that we're getting a little bit of feedback somewhere. Are we okay now? Yeah, somebody may have to try muting. Try that. Yeah, I'm getting too much feedback here. That seems to be it. There's a couple statements by Denise that I'd like to read and see if you have feedback. And then there's a question that seems related to it. So I'll read her statements first. She addresses the first one to Jodie. Hi, Jodie. There is absolute historical harm to a whole race. We need to figure out how to fix this. Even for those of us who don't think we are suffering, we need to be clearly identify most of the suffering in order to know what needs to be fixed. So that part of the statement focuses on identifying the suffering. She goes on then, I think PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome, needs to be looked at. Most blacks are not going to come to the table because life has shown them nothing really changes. This is a part of the syndrome. Money, unfortunately, grabs a person's attention. Collectively, a whole race of people would start paying attention if reparations started with monetary rewards. Then we need to ensure that there are educators, psychologists trained in curing PTSS. It's a big statement. Is there anything you want to comment on that before I go on to a question?
I would say, I guess particularly when we're thinking about reparations, because I think this conversation is happening on so many levels, I would encourage folks to look at the Chicago torture reparations work, because one of the things that they did was not only, and I can put the link in here to all panelists and attendees, they didn't only provide financial reparations, but really thought strategically about how to engage with issues of trauma. And there are many groups and organizations that are looking at reparations and reimagining reparations. So when we even think about monetary compensation, how do we see that in the form of wealth? There are places in Nova Scotia that have done it, and so on. And folks are interested in hearing more about that. You can also reach out to me because we've documented some of that work as a part of our Truth and Reconciliation work, our joy. But I think reparations is a booming conversation, but people also reimagining what reparations look like beyond monetary compensation. And so some folks are designing that model. So I would say I agree with that, and I think people are looking at that.
Tom, you want to say anything, or should I move on here? You're muted though right now. Tom, you're muted. Do you want?
This moves more quickly than my fingers can move. I do encourage people to look at the draft reparations document it's a 15-page document on the website under the reparations working group. Give you an idea of where this group, they've been working for more than a year now, and looking at personal reparations actions, community and societal, educational actions towards repair, really looking at a comprehensive look at this work.
Carol says, I'm co-facilitating race dialogue / identity divide dialogues, both in person and online. I've taken STAR in 1 and 2 training. I'm most interested in your thoughts on how to get diverse groups of folks to these dialogue processes, and about increasing motivation of folks to engage in these types of conversations. So the question is how to get people engaged in these, motivated.
You want me to answer first, Tom? I think intentionality and naming what really exists. So I think particularly what community you're in, right? It's not only about the larger structure of like racism in the United States, but the particular, I think, historical narrative of the community you're building that dialogue in. So I think when you're bringing folks together, naming what is real, naming what the history and narrative of that community is, but also kind of the example I gave with the local coming to the table group in Harrisonburg, Virginia, really being intentional about accessibility. So where are your meetings happening? Because oftentimes, no matter whether we come from a space of privilege or not, we often are valuing the voices of those with more privilege. So that has to do with where we're having our meeting. Is it transportation accessible? Is there food provided? These are very like small things that we often don't think about. Is there childcare provided? What does accessibility look like? And so those are some of the things that I would encourage you to think about. Who are you trying to get to be at the table? What voices do you have, but also what voices are really missing? But to also always be in collaboration with other local community organizations that can provide skills and expertise that you might not be able to have, and to be as accessible as possible, particularly in language. Many times we politicize racism, but it's like people know what it is. They don't need to go to the academy to talk about it, nor do they. And I know in some ways I'm speaking in that language, but like people often don't need to read a book to talk about oppression and racism. They know what it is, but the language that they use to describe it often looks different. And so just really thinking about some of those things I think is really important, but to always be in constant collaboration And naming, I think naming is key. Naming why you're there, naming what's happening, naming over and over again, many of those things.
I think there's also an important aspect to this, and that is working in affinity groups in addition to working together across racial lines. You know, white supremacy in this nation and around the world has been the dominant force for centuries and centuries. And it's going to take a whole lot of white people not only acknowledging, but doing the work to undo these systems and structures of racial oppression. And so a lot of this is white people talking to white people. There's a really important aspect to this, and helping white people to understand what privilege is, and you know, getting this kind of conversation taking place in schools, in churches, in other community groups, and that's where, you know, coming to the table is trying to get into new and different spaces, to have the opportunity for more white people to not only come to the table, but stay at the table when things get difficult, which they do. And, you know, people don't know something until they know something. So having the patience to help in the education process, because the system is really good at educating. The system is really good at perpetuating my male, white, Christian, heterosexual, able-bodied supremacy. And it's really good at making me unaware of that. And so finding ways to wake people up who have skin that looks like mine is a real important aspect to this work as well. So I just, you know, it's a strong encouragement to do the work, and there's no single answer on how to do that. Just keep living the life of the people that we want to be, creating the world that we want to create, and being open and honest in our everyday interactions with people at the grocery store, on the bus, walking down the street, that we're clear and open about what we're trying to create in our politics, in our churches, in every aspect of our society, and doing our best not to lay on the shame and the guilt, which, as Howard has taught me well over the years, we do a really lousy job in this society of dealing with shame and guilt, and we use it as a battering ram or a bat over people, rather than as a useful tool to help people to wake up to what's necessary in order to transform. And that's really what we're aiming for here is transformation, creating a new way of looking and a new way of being.
There's a question that seems to relate to that. Denise asked, do you think the coming to the table group should be established in Black communities and white communities? How would you go about doing that?
To be honest with you, my feeling is having a coming to the table group is designed to be interracial. That the concept is bringing together both sides from the legacy of slavery, the workshop that Jodie and I facilitated in Los Angeles had people who were neither of African descent or European descent. And so welcoming people to a broader table, recognizing that the legacy of slavery impacts all of us today. And so whatever the community is, finding ways to bridge the gaps that divide us along racial lines in particular, but also along all the other lines that intersect with race, along, gender issues and sexuality and religion and politics. How do we bridge all of these gaps? And so it's like wherever it works, go for it. Is my feeling. Jodie?
I think I would agree with that. Yeah, because I think even within that, there isn't one particular kind of experience that all Black folks face in the same way when it comes to conversations around racism. And I think sometimes it's easy to make that assumption. There are different kinds of privileges we have, even if it's not that kind of racial privilege, that kind of white skin privilege. And so I think those are the things that are important to name. And that's a space of decolonizing I think we're trying to get at as an organization, about how do we hold spaces for the nuance of our identities that very much is different from the mythology and the beliefs and stories that the systems of oppression have told us. And I think that's a space where all of us are challenged, right? Because if we live in our own community, we're only seeing what we believe happens with the rest of the world, or seeing it particularly through our mainstream form of media. So I think that's also a place for us to investigate, but also to acknowledge that, you know, coming to the table isn't going to be the space for everyone. You know, some people are not there yet, and that is okay. And we need to be okay with that, but to also name that when people are ready, that it is a space that they can come to.
Jessica wants to know whether coming to the table has been involved at all in conversations around the kneeling and anthem protest. Have you had any, has there been any attempt to address that, or any experience through the groups?
The thing about coming to the table, I mean, Jodie and I do a particular focus in our work with the organization, with the board. But coming to the table is really more of an octopus of an organization with so many different aspects of it between the working groups and the local affiliate groups that are operating independently. So coming to the table, for instance, doesn't lobby for change of laws, but there are many coming to the table members who do. Coming to the table itself doesn't do maybe particular things, but a local group will partner up with NAACP or Surge or other organizations that are doing this kind of work for various actions, various activities and roles. So it's anything that is working to heal from and acknowledge and undo the wounds from the legacy of slavery is part of the work for coming to the table. And, you know, we have groups that meet in churches, groups that meet in restaurants. It's wherever. One of our more recent local groups is a closed group, not open to the public, within a medical center addressing, racism within the medical profession. So it's people are finding this model and using the principles of coming to the table in their NAACP chapter or in their work with Surge or Black Lives Matter. So that there are all sorts of people that are in strong support of what Colin Kaepernick began with kneeling at football games and has expanded, sort of by fits and starts in many, many different ways. And so as I would say there's real strong support within the wider community of coming to the table, from what I see in the Facebook group that's getting posted and the discussions that take place there. But as an official action of coming to the table, we're really an organization of multi-volunteer individuals and groups that are taking actions within the spirit of the approach to undoing racism and systemic slavery and legacy of slavery.
There's something I want to name. It's not particular on this question, but there's some difficulty sometimes when we have conversations around racism, because I think we often, when we're talking about like white folks, we're talking about like the mythology of whiteness. And I think that there are different levels that I particularly, let me speak for myself, that I particularly filtered into that, right? So the moment where people begin to see me as more Jamaican than Black, and it becomes to make them feel more comfortable, or as someone with a master's, right? So there are different moments that I've been filtered into this kind of ideology and mythology of what whiteness is. And I think that there are different moments all of us have perpetuated it, that whether it was through those small relationships that we had with folks or on the systemic level. And I think the more we begin to name and acknowledge that, the more we move towards not relying upon one particular group of people, that particularly folks who navigate through the world as white, that might perpetuate it more to be the bearers of making change. Sometimes, and I'm naming this because I'm seeing that in the questions, a lot of people are naming closed groups. I think sometimes it's important for folks who look alike and have some of the similar experiences, not the same, but similar experiences on a systemic level, to be in space with each other. And it doesn't always have to be around solving a problem, right? Because if we begin to be so problem focused, and this is something that David says, the people become the problem, but the problem is the problem. And I think that's important to be able to acknowledge. Sometimes you just need spaces where people can be as unapologetic and authentic as possible, as a method of healing and liberation, that we're not just talking about justice around historical harms, but what it means to be on this journey and path for liberation. And sometimes we need spaces where we can just be with each other, and it doesn't always require, and I'm speaking for myself as a Black woman, it doesn't always require white folks to be at the table. And it doesn't mean that it's only just victims being in a space with each other, but sometimes there's a way in which the system on a subconscious level bounds the way that we see each other or believe what each other will be saying. And I think having sometimes those closed groups allows people to really be more authentic. And it's sad to say that's a reality, but I think it's important to be able to acknowledge the importance of that space as a practice of healing.
We've got several follow-ups on that question, but I'm going to stop back. I'm going to jump back to that question before this about community, Black and white, forming them in Black and white communities, because there have been two follow-up suggestions. One person says, now if I can find them, these questions are coming in here. One person says the idea of a closed group is interesting. Any thoughts on how to have that conversation with an institution about doing this? And
can I just speak to that real quick, Howard?
Because I'm lost the other one here that I want.
Okay, this is one of the real interesting things. The last time that I took STAR 2, one of the things that I was focused on with Sharon Morgan and I, my co-author of with Gather at the Table, we were focused on using STAR principles in hierarchical organizations, which it's how open and honest are you going to be in a corporate boardroom coming to the table meeting if you're in circle with someone who can hire and fire you? And so how do you get into these hierarchical organizations and create enough safety where, and that goes to the touchstones, it goes to the agreements on how we're going to be with each other, so that we can be honest about systemic racism within a particular organization. It's not that coming to the table is encouraging closed groups, but there are situations where it makes sense for a particular organization or type of organization that really needs to do work internally. And I think of, corporations. If there was a group of management and administrators, or at a university level where staff, faculty, and administration are doing this work together, and then opening up more widely at some point, but really getting down to the core issues of systemic and structural racism within the type of organization that they have. And this is, boy, we did not come to easy answers. We were dealing with issues of, STAR has been dealing with the military. Talk about a hierarchical organization, and dealing in corporate America. So I think there's some real, the thing that I think coming to the table in general, this approach is so flexible that it allows for variations on the approach to meet the particular needs of a specific community, with the caveat or the understanding that what we're doing is honestly and openly addressing the legacy of slavery with this particular approach.
Another follow-up on that other question. Tom, there are many, Denise said, Tom, there are many communities that don't see the other groups of people. We could form these subdivisions and have meetings with the other groups from time to time to share information and views. So I don't know if either of you have comments on that, and then we'll move on to some other topics.
Just agree, absolutely.
All right, good idea. A number of people are wondering if there's a connection with the Kellogg Truth and Reconciliation Initiative and how they're intersecting what's happening with that.
The Kellogg Truth.
A little bit of background on that.
Yeah, the Kellogg Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation Enterprise, coming to the table, has been a partner in that effort from the very beginning. And we were at the big summit that they held almost a year ago now in Southern California, along with about 100 other partner organizations. And Daryl Byler, Carl Stauffer, Fania Davis that Jodie works with at Our Joy, myself, other members of Coming to the Table who are connected with Coming to the Table, whose names I'm not remembering at the moment, were part of the teams that were actually planning the various sectors within the focuses within the overall TRHT enterprise. And so we've been involved with it from the beginning and remain a very enthusiastic partner for the work that they're doing. It's been launched in 11 communities, and that's defined broadly. You've got a community that's just a particular city, and you've got another one is the whole state of Alaska. So it's different in different places. But doing this work, Kellogg has made a significant long-term financial commitment and organizational commitment to this work. I've certainly never heard of anything like the commitment that they're putting towards this. And so we're involved there and working with them and in communication with them about ways that we can collaborate with them and with other partner organizations to further the work.
Jodie, you want to add anything on that? You're involved in this work.
No, I mean, I think that sounds great. One of the areas that Coming to the Table has actually been exploring is thinking about the TRHT work on college campuses to expand our youth base. And so we are hoping to really be in relationship with what would probably be 10 sites on college campuses to begin thinking about how do academies of higher education engage in conversations around truth and racial healing, which some of that is happening through a collective of folks like Georgetown, Yale, other places that are looking at their particular history and legacy with slavery. And so just to name, that's one of the areas that we hope to also grow deeper into, but are in constant communication and support with Kellogg and the other folks that they're supporting as well.
Leonard asks, what is the common language, if any, that people are bringing or taking away from the table, and what are some of the desired outcomes, or perhaps it is just a journey? Any thoughts on that?
Can you say that again, Howard?
What is the common language, if any, people are bringing or taking away from the table, and what are some of the desired outcomes, or perhaps it is the journey?
Yeah, I really appreciate the conclusion of that, because this is a journey that we're all on together. Even when we don't recognize it or acknowledge it, we're on this journey together. And one of the things that I would say is that within coming to the table, a common language, I would say it's sort of grounded in the values that coming to the table subscribes to: values of inclusion, respect and tolerance, honesty, truthfulness and transparency, justice, real justice, compassion, mercy, forgiveness, peace and nonviolence, and love. That does everyone share that? No, I would not say that. But those values have been developed over time, and so the basis of that, when someone is in a coming to the table affiliate group or a working group, those are the basic values that we're asking people to operate under. And that said, more of a focus is on an ongoing basis is the agreements, the touchstones that we're working with in a particular, topic area or a particular meeting, just being real clear on these values and these touchstones. So that's where we're creating that common language along the journey. Does that make sense? Jodie, do you have more to add?
When I'm thinking about the conversations that are happening away from the table, I think more and more people are saying that we just need to name our particular kind of history. There's also a lot of development with folks looking at faith practices and acknowledging our history and legacy of slavery. So I think that's important to acknowledge that there's a deep connection between these conversations and particular practices of faith that a lot of coming to the table members are having. A lot of people are really thinking about healing and just asking, how do I serve? And so I think that's where a lot of the conversations are going. There are many folks who are part of local groups who are really moving to start more and more local groups. So every time that they have a conversation with someone or harm happens, they feel really called to say, how do I support you to move forward in creating a local group, but also just to have a conversation about what you need. And so I think there is definitely growth in some of those areas.
The question here came up, was there a difference between an affiliate group and a working group?
Yes, the affiliate groups are the groups that are specific to a geographic location. So within, like in the city of Richmond, Virginia, there is a local affiliate group. They're now up to 4 meetings per month. And because there's so much interest, they have something like 500 people on their local mailing list. And so they meet specifically with each other and developing the relationships, working through the approach together. Working groups are focused on a particular topic. So on the website, under groups up at the top, you'll see affiliate groups, and then you'll see working groups. And so working groups, like, the writers working group, the writers are from all over the country. The reparations working group, they're all over the country. And so the working groups, when there's a particular topic, a particular issue to deal with that they're going to work on, and every one of them has been developed. I mean, this isn't something the board said, let's have a pilgrimages working group. This was 2 local affiliate groups, one in Los Angeles and one in Richmond, that came up with this idea for doing these pilgrimages and launched this particular working group. And so you got people all over the country working on that particular activity and creating opportunities for people to visit sites related to the legacy of slavery, and then dealing with each other using the coming to the table approach on working towards understanding, acknowledgement, healing, and transformation. So I hope that clears it up.
Well, we're almost out of time. We got a couple questions here. One's very specific, and that is, have you evaluated the work's impact and process, and has any of that been published?
We actually had a CJP intern that did some evaluation work on the effectiveness of the board and the interaction with local groups. And that's been more than a year ago that was completed. And I honestly don't remember if it was a published bit or not.
We never published.
Okay. Okay. So, and this is another one of those areas that, if we were when we are a larger organization and have the resources to be more strategic and more methodical about evaluation, you know, it's really important. I mean, we do anytime we have a grant, you know, part of the reporting process, evaluation of the effectiveness of the activities from that grant. But as far as a whole organization, it's another one of those areas that we look to do in the future.
We have a couple minutes for question to follow up on that kneeling football game question. Jessica, as I completely agree, was wondering about the best practices or ideas on how to address that conversation because our veterans are so traumatized by it. We who kneel are guilted into silence, or those who don't kneel, and find that even more traumatic. Any thoughts just more about how to deal with that trauma and the pressures around?
As I'm talking, I'm also thinking through this. I want to name that. I think particularly when it comes to the kneeling, one of the ways I would suggest is naming the perceived reality of what the kneeling signifies, and the reality of like how we got here, right? That this isn't particularly the first time something like this has happened. It just happened to also happen on a large stage in relationship to the NFL, right? And so I think that's one of the things that's important to name, but also the intersection of veterans who are also working with Kaepernick to be able to think about the ways in which he can say, like, I respect you, and there's a particular kind of history and legacy of this nation that has affected me as a man of color. And so I think where we get caught up with this conversation is that we are often talking about the perceived reality, not to say that's not important. We're often talking about the perceived reality. So then we just go back and forth about what our experiences are and how we view the situation instead of naming what is the deeper underlying issue and root that we're talking about, right? And also that I think that brings us to really name our particular history in the United States around violence against African Americans and even the symbolism of the history and transformation of our flag. And these are all conversations that we don't have because I think it becomes this search for the truth that then shifts the very reality that we've taken as a part of our identity. So how does that affect the shift within our identity? Because one of the things I think that a lot of people don't know, for example, is that when Kaepernick was initially sitting after speaking with a U.S. veteran is when he decided to kneel. It was through that very conversation, right? So it's how do I honor this kind of particular history and legacy of veterans' rights in the United States? And at the same time, how do I begin to draw attention to police terrorism in the United States? And it's not about who's wrong and who's right, but what is happening? What is the problem, right? And we need to begin talking more deeply about the problem and not so much the people that we believe are the problem. I mean, I hope that was clear. I think it is something that is complex, but I think a lot of it is about what we view as reality and what is actually happening.
And I think it also raises another really important point, and that is that we not look at any group, whether it's veterans or white people or black people, as a monolithic group. One of the things that I so appreciate about the coming to the table approach is it's looking at the hearts and minds of individuals. And if we want to really transform our nation and transform our communities, we need to transform the hearts and minds of individuals and recognize that within these monolithic groups are a whole bunch of individual people that all bring different experiences and knowledge and education and family backgrounds into play. And the building of the relationships helps us to recognize that when our focus is on this particular work.
Well, that's it. If there's any good place to end this, I guess that's a good one. I wish we didn't have to end it, but we're running out of time. Thank you, both of you, for being part of this. Yeah, we have so many more things we could talk about, but I need to end it. So thank you, and thank you to those of you who have joined us. I'm going to be turning it back to Kajungo. He's going to tell us more about what's coming up. So thank you again, and have a good evening. Or actually, I'll be back with you shortly for a little bit. So I'll turn it over to Kajungo.
trying to say, but it doesn't come.
Just start talking.
Thank you so much. And I'm just putting my sharing PowerPoint here. Yet it. Oh, thank you so much for sharing. And again, my name is Kajum Turi, and I am a graduate student at Center for Justice and Peace Building in Harrisonburg, Virginia. I work as a graduate assistant for the institute, and I have a couple announcements to share with you this evening. So this webinar series is focusing on restorative justice and the healing historical harms. And the series will focus on how restorative justice approach can be used to help acknowledge and transform the legacy of slavery and racial injustice in the United States. So webinar taking place the third Wednesday of every month, 4:30 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Coming webinar, it will focus on history and the reconciliation initiative, and that will be December 13, 2017, 4:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The guests will be Linda Armstrong and Barbara Holley. Please visit our website for registration. Save the date for upcoming training. Again, this is a repetition announcement. The topic will be Transformative Community Conference Training. Instructor will be David Anderson Hooker, Friday, February 16 to Saturday, February 17, 2018, Eastern Mennonite University here in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Very soon, this information will be our website, so please visit our website and you will get more information and registration. Upcoming for STAR training, and I'm so happy that today it was more on STAR or trauma. So there's offerings coming. Be alert on that. So STAR level 1 training, it will be January 8 to 12, 2018 at Eastern Mennonite University, Harrisonburg, Virginia. STAR 1 again, level 1, it will be February 19 to 23, 2018 at EMU, Harrisonburg, Virginia. STAR 1, level 1 again, it will be March 5 to 9. This will be at Lancaster. STAR level 2 training to be on November 13 to 17, which is going on right now here at Harrisonburg, Virginia. Restorative Justice Graduate Certificate. This is all allow working professional to continue working while completing your work. It helps to reflect on your work and increase your knowledge and skills. And this certificate may allow you, maybe allow all you need to vitalize your vision and work. So please visit our website for more information and registration for that offer. Restorative Justice in Education. It's different focus on options for K-12 educators, administrators, or other school leaders, community leaders, and social workers or school counselors. Restorative Justice in Education concentration, students in the Master in Education program can pursue and interdisciplinary concentration on restorative justice education by taking courses through the Education Department as well as EMU Center for Justice and Peace Building. RGE or Restorative Justice Education Graduate Certificate is only 15 hours graduate certificate in Restorative Justice in Education. Please visit our website for more information and registration. We are offering 2 programs, Master in Conflict Transformation and Masters in Restorative Justice. Please visit our website for more information and registration for these amazing programs. Last but not least, the Zehr Institute website is available as a source for upcoming events, resources, the schedule for upcoming webinars, and the repository for past webinars that are linked to YouTube. The recording for tonight's webinar will be available next week by Monday. And now I want to invite again Howard Zehr for the final closing comments.
Thank you. Good. You might want to look at your chat windows before you go. A couple of people have offered things. Chuck in Atlanta has offered to be a resource. He's a part of a local group there. And he also said that their October meeting in Atlanta was exclusively a talking circle on the topic of the kneeling protests, military flag patriotism in the NFL. It was one of the most powerful meetings we've had. So you might check that chat window in here and just see if there's anything else you want to take home with you. Thank you again for joining us. And remember that the last in the series on historical harms, at least for now, is coming up in December. And it will be a more concrete case study, I guess, in a sense. So I urge you to sign up for that. And then check our website, and we'll be announcing the next series shortly. Thank you very much, and have a good evening. And Jodie and Tom, thanks so much for being part of this. It's great.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Howard. Sure appreciate your leadership on this.
Thank you all.
And thank you for our guests, participants from Brazil. We appreciate for your presence today.
That's right. Yeah, we have a number of people from Brazil here with us today. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.